Think about the Roman Empire for a second. Just, close your eyes and genuinely try to picture it.
Yeah.
And I don't mean the pristine white marble statues sitting in museums under track lighting. I don't mean the organized geometric lines of the legions marching in perfect sterile unison across a movie
I
screen.
mean, that Hollywood version.
Exactly. Strip all of that away. I want you to imagine the absolute visceral reality of living in that world during late antiquity. Because it is crowded, it is filthy, it is unimaginably loud.
And completely overwhelming.
You are standing in a cosmopolitan marketplace that stretches from the damp, freezing, miserable forests of Britain all the way down to the blistering, sun-bleached Syrian desert. And beneath the noise, beneath the wooden wheels of the chariots grinding against stone, beneath the screaming of the market vendors, there is this profound, suffocating sense of psychological isolation.
It's a dread, an existential dread.
Yes, just humming, vibrating in the background of everyday life. You are a microscopic speck in a terrifyingly massive machine.
And it is a machine that does not care if you live or die. I mean, you are entirely expendable.
Right. And our mission on this deep dive is to explore exactly what human beings do when they're suffocating in that kind of dread. We're going to unearth the brutal, deeply intimate mystery cults that stepped into the dark to save the Roman soul.
It's such a heavy topic.
It is. We need to understand how extreme violence, profound sexual subversion, and sheer psychological terror paved the way for the total transformation of Western civilization. Because to understand them, it is to understand the bedrock of everything we believe today.
Well, you have to remember, it was an era defined by a massive, silent spiritual vacuum. Mm-hmm. You really have to understand what religion actually functioned as for a Roman citizen at that time.
Right. It wasn't what we think of as religion today.
Not at all. Traditional Roman polytheism, the old Olympian pantheon of Jupiter and Mars, it wasn't a religion of the heart. It wasn't something you felt internally. It was a cold daylight contract.
A transaction, like a bureaucratic necessity.
That is the exact core of it. It was a fiercely legalistic system managed entirely by the state apparatus. You had magistrates and state-appointed priests who were politicians, really performing these rigid, mathematically precise public rituals.
And if they messed up even slightly?
Oh, if the priest stumbled over a single syllable of the prayer, they had to start the entire hours-long ritual over from the very beginning.
Just exhausting.
And the entire goal of this exhausting perfection was simply to maintain the Pax Deorum, right? The peace of the gods. You sacrificed the animal with the correct blade at the correct angle, and in exchange, the gods didn't send an earthquake to swallow the city or a plague to wipe out the legions.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the entirety of the relationship. It offered absolutely zero personal solace. It gave you no moral compass for your internal private life.
And it offered nothing, absolutely nothing but shadows and dust when it came to the terrifying prospect of the afterlife.
Nothing at all.
It's like a soulless corporate terms of service agreement. You know, you're scrolling through this massive, impenetrable legal document on your phone. You don't feel any emotional connection to it. You don't even read the clauses.
You just click, I accept.
Exactly. You just click it so the societal software keeps running so you can use the app. But a terms of service agreement is entirely laughably useless when you wake up at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat.
Staring at the ceiling.
Staring at the ceiling, utterly terrified of your own mortality. It gives you absolutely nothing to hold on to in the dark.
And that is the fatal flaw of the entire Roman project. Because a human being cannot survive in the dark without something to hold on to. The human mind will snap. So as the borders of the empire expanded, as they aggressively absorbed all these disparate ancient cultures through conquest, the spiritual floodgates blew wide open.
The vacuum had to be filled.
Exactly. This massive, hollow civic vacuum was suddenly inundated with what we've called the mystery cults. These are ancient, foreign, incredibly potent traditions. Bleeding out of the deep mountains of Phrygia, the ancient sands of Egypt, the high plains of Persia.
And they offered the exact, deliberate inverse of that dry daylight civic contract.
Yes. Where Rome offered public ritual, the mysteries offered intense, visceral sensory overload. They offered absolute, unbreachable secrecy. You weren't just a citizen number anymore. You were an initiate, a brother, a sister.
You belonged to an egalitarian community that existed entirely outside the traditional social hierarchy.
And above all, they offered the literal, experiential, physical promise of immortality.
Well, if the civic religion was a dry legal contract, then Rome's first real plunge into the mysteries was just, I mean, it was a desperate injection of raw, untamed chaos into the bloodstream of the empire. And it's crucial to remember that this didn't happen during a period of enlightenment or peace.
No, not at all.
It happened out of pure, unadulterated wartime panic.
204 BCE. The Second Punic War. This is the absolute crucible of Roman history. Hannibal is not just at the gates. He has been ravaging the Italian peninsula, burning farms, slaughtering armies for over a decade.
He practically wiped out an entire generation of Roman men.
He butchered tens of thousands of Roman citizens in a single afternoon at Cannae. The state is literally bleeding out. Manpower is depleted. The Senate, these stoic, hardened men, they are completely terrified. They are out of options.
So they turn to the supernatural.
They do what panicked politicians do when the logical world fails. They consult the oracle, the Sibylline books. And the prophecy tells them that they can only drive this foreign, invincible invader out of Italy if they bring an alien deity into the very heart of Rome, the great Idaean mother of the gods, Magna Mater.
Known in the Wild East as Cybele.
Cybele, yeah.
And here is where the story gets so beautifully surreal. Because she doesn't arrive as a beautifully carved marble statue of a benevolent woman.
No.
The Roman Senate sends an embassy all the way to Asia Minor, to the city of Pessinus, and they bring back a rock. An aniconic, heavy, black meteoric stone. It is literally an alien object that fell from the sky, radiating this wild, unshaped, terrifying power.
And the Romans are fundamentally horrified by it, even as they know they desperately need it to survive. There is a deep psychological friction happening here. You are bringing untamed Eastern ecstatic nature worship into the hyper-structured, obsessively patriarchal, rigid heart of Rome.
It's like bringing a live grenade into a library.
That's a perfect way to put it. And you see that friction perfectly managed, perfectly encapsulated in the legend of its arrival.
The story of Claudia Quinta. This is such a gritty, brilliant, highly theatrical piece of Roman propaganda. The ship carrying this massive black stone finally reaches the mouth of the Tiber River after this long voyage, and instantly it runs aground on a muddy shoal.
It is stuck.
Stuck fast. The absolute worst omen imaginable. The gods are rejecting Rome. The war effort is doomed. The strongest men in the city are breaking their backs, knee-deep in the mud, hauling on thick ropes, their hands bleeding, and this massive wooden ship will not budge an inch. And then Claudia Quinta steps forward from the crowd.
A woman the Senate deeply, intensely despised.
Right. She's patrician. She comes from a noble family, but she is considered highly immodest. She dresses a little too elegantly. Her makeup is a little too pronounced. Her hair is a little too intricate.
And she has a sharp, defiant tongue.
Yes. The old, rigid, conservative men of the Senate view her as the walking, breathing embodiment of Roman moral decay. But she ignores them. She steps right up to the prow of this massive stranded ship. She drops to her knees in the mud. She prays to this alien goddess to vindicate her chastity, to prove her virtue.
And then the miracle happens.
Depending on the poet you read, she either takes the heavy rope in her bare, uncalloused hands, or she unties her own delicate sash, loops it around the timber of the ship, and she just pulls, almost effortlessly. Miraculously, the massive vessel slides free from the sucking mud, and she pulls it upstream all the way to Rome.
It is brilliant, religious realpolitik. Think about the psychological maneuvering of what that narrative accomplishes for the Roman psyche.
Right, it's about control.
Exactly. You have this terrifying, blood-soaked, unpredictable goddess from the Wild East, and she is suddenly, physically tamed by the pure, unyielding virtue of a Roman matron. The state is essentially telling its terrified citizens, yes, we brought a monster into the house, but Roman discipline, Roman virtue, holds the leash.
So they take the black stone, they enshrine it on the Palatine Hill, the most elite real estate in the city.
And Hannibal is defeated shortly after. Cybele officially becomes the savior of the Republic. But the Romans had absolutely no idea what kind of psychological virus they had actually unleashed in their city.
Because you cannot separate Cybele from her mythology. And her mythology is a straight vertical drop into a terrifying descent of madness. She isn't just a warm, nurturing earth mother. She is ferocious. She is the earth that consumes you.
And her entire cult, her entire esoteric meaning, revolves around her young, beautiful consort, Attis.
The myth of Attis.
Yes, and you have to understand this isn't just a myth. It is a blueprint for religious madness. It's this incredibly dense, bizarre web of gender fluidity, of divine, suffocating obsession, and just profound, intimate violence.
How does it start?
It starts with a primordial, hermaphroditic deity named Agdistis. Agdistis is so wild, so uncontrollable, that the other gods violently and forcibly castrate them. From that spilled divine blood hitting the soil, an almond tree violently grows.
Okay, an almond tree.
Right. And then a river nymph comes along, places an almond from the tree into her breast, instantly becomes pregnant, and eventually gives birth to a boy.
Attis. Wait, stop right there. I need to hit the brakes and get this straight. You have a hermaphroditic god who gets forcibly mutilated, their blood grows an almond tree, and a river nymph gets pregnant by putting a nut in her dress.
Yes.
How did a rigidly logical, law-obsessed Roman citizen hear that story and not just laugh the priests out of the city?
Because the Romans understood that esoteric myth is not literal history. It is a psychological cipher. To the uninitiated, yes, it sounds like a bizarre, chaotic fever dream. But to the initiate, the hermaphroditic nature of Agdistis represents the totality of the cosmos before it is fractured into male and female, into light and dark.
So it's allegorical.
Deeply allegorical.
Yeah.
The violent castration is the necessary trauma of creation. The blood becoming a tree is the cycle of life springing from death. They aren't reading it as a newspaper article. They're reading it as the hidden, terrifying architecture of the human soul.
Okay, so Attis is born from this trauma. He grows up into this breathtakingly beautiful youth. And Cybele, this massive, overwhelming cosmic force, becomes intensely, possessively obsessed with him.
And Attis tries to reject it. He tries to normalize his life. He tries to marry a mortal princess to have a normal, structured human existence.
And Cybele crashes the wedding. She descends in her full, terrifying, mind-bending glory. She doesn't attack him physically. She strikes him with divine madness. Absolute, shattering psychological frenzy.
He flees the city.
He tears off his clothes, runs deep into the wild, jagged, freezing mountains, and there, beneath a pine tree, he takes a sharp piece of jagged stone and he violently castrates himself. He bleeds to death, screaming into the cold earth.
It's a horrific image.
And Cybele, in her devastating grief, resurrects him, or rather, she ensures his body never decays, turning him into the eternal, tragic symbol of the dying and rising vegetation.
And this is where the horror truly begins for Rome. Because this isn't just a campfire story they tell on holidays. This is the blueprint. Because the priests of Cybele, a group of men known as the Galli, they replicated this.
They literally, physically lived the myth.
Voluntary self-castration in the middle of the Roman Empire.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
In a state of pure, chemically and psychologically induced religious ecstasy, these men would mutilate their own bodies to serve the goddess. They would sever themselves from their own biology. And afterward, the Galli completely discarded their former masculine identities.
They wore bright, flowing women's clothing, right?
Yes, silks dyed in saffron and purple. They painted their faces with heavy theatrical makeup. They grew their hair long, soaking it in expensive perfumes. They occupied this deeply unsettling liminal space in society. They were a walking contradiction. Ancient authors called them the tersum sexus, the third gender.
I really want to pause and sit on just how deeply terrifying this visual must have been to the traditional Roman mind. Think about it. The defining foundational characteristic of a Roman man was virtus.
Control.
Absolute unyielding control. Control over your wife, control over your slaves, control over the state apparatus, and above all, control over your own body and your own passions. And right here, operating right in the very center of the empire, is a priesthood that represents the absolute ecstatic, bloody surrender of masculine control.
It was an existential threat to Roman identity.
You see this horror perfectly articulated in the poet Catullus, poem 63. It's an absolute masterpiece of psychological terror.
Catullus tells the story of a young, arrogant Greek youth, Attis, sailing across the sea to Phrygia. He enters the dark, suffocating woods. The heavy rhythmic drums of Cybele start beating. The cymbals crash. The madness slowly overtakes his rational mind. And with a sharp piece of flint, he severs his own manhood in the dark.
But the genius of Catullus isn't the physical violence. The violence is secondary.
It's the grammar.
The grammar is the terror.
Right.
The exact moment the bloody act is done, Catullus instantly, brutally shifts the pronouns in the poem. The text suddenly refers to Attis as a she, a counterfeit female trapped in the freezing woods.
It's a permanent shift.
Yes, and when the sun comes up the next morning and the chemical rush of the madness finally lifts, she looks out at the ocean, and she realizes the utter, inescapable permanence of what has just happened. The homeland is gone, the Greek gymnasium is gone, the masculinity is gone. She is a biological slave to the goddess forever.
And when she tries to run back toward the sea to escape, Cybele doesn't even speak. She just unchains her lions and drives the panicked youth back into the dark woods forever.
When you look at this through a modern lens, I mean, how on earth did the Roman state tolerate this? I look at the Galli like the most extreme, countercultural, radically subversive body modification movement you could possibly imagine operating just down the street from the conservative Senate.
Yeah.
How did the magistrates not just march the legions in and burn the temple to the ground?
Because they couldn't. Cybele saved them from Hannibal. She was officially integrated into the state. So they did what Rome always does. When it encounters something it fears but cannot destroy, they tried to quarantine it through bureaucracy.
Typical Rome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Roman citizens were strictly legally forbidden from ever joining the priesthood. The Galleys were almost entirely non-citizens, freedmen, marginalized provincials. The state physically locked them inside their temple precinct on the Palatine Hill for the vast majority of the year. They treated them like a contained spiritual infection.
Except for specific, highly regulated festival days.
Right. The Day of Blood, March 24th. The Die Sanguinis.
The quarantine lifts.
The heavy temple doors open. The Galli pour out into the pristine streets of Rome to publicly mourn the death of Attis. And it is a scene of pure, horrifying frenzy. They whip their own bare backs with flagra heavy scourges tipped with jagged sheep knuckle bones that tear the skin to ribbons.
God.
They take double-bladed knives and systematically slash their own arms and chests, spinning in frenzied hypnotic dances to the beating of the drums, letting their own blood spray over the stone altars and over the screaming crowds. It was a terrifying, mesmerizing, visceral spectacle of total self-annihilation.
Which, incredibly, was then immediately followed the very next morning by the Hilaria, a raucous, joyous, almost hysterical carnival of a festival celebrating the resurrection.
The emotional whiplash is just astounding.
And that profound swing from absolute bloody trauma to euphoric resurrection, that leads us to the absolute apex of this cult, the ritual that entirely defined the ecstasy of blood, the tauroctony.
The blood baptism.
Yes. If you wanted absolute, ironclad spiritual rebirth, if you wanted the goddess to personally guarantee your soul's survival, and if you had the money, and it costs a massive fortune, usually sponsored by a hyper-wealthy senator or an emperor trying to curry favor, this is the horrific, beautiful ordeal you went through.
And we really need to dissect exactly what this entailed, because it defies modern comprehension.
Put yourself in the initiate's shoes for this. Really visualize this. You have been fasting for days. You are starving. Your senses are heightened. You are completely purified. You are dressed in a pristine, blindingly white, incredibly expensive toga.
Okay.
The priests lead you out of the temple and into the sanctuary courtyard. The sun is beating down. And in the center of the dirt, they have excavated a deep, dark, rectangular pit in the earth. The fossa sanguinis. The trench of blood.
It's essentially a grave.
You climb down a wooden ladder into this tight, claustrophobic dirt trench. It is cool down there. It smells like damp soil, crushed pine needles, and burning incense. And then the priests drag a heavy, massive wooden platform directly over the top of the pit. It's perforated, full of drilled holes and wide slats. You are sealed in the dark. You are buried alive.
And above you, they lead a massive, incredibly powerful bull onto the creaking wood. It's gilded, its heavy horns wrapped in vibrant floral garlands. You can hear its hooves scraping the wood just inches above your face.
The anticipation must have been suffocating.
The high priest, the archigellus, steps forward with a harp, a specialized, heavy, brutally curved hooked sword. He doesn't just neatly slit the animal's throat like a standard civic sacrifice. That isn't the point. He drives the heavy hook deep into the neck and violently rips the flesh open.
He's explicitly aiming for the major arteries. He wants a geyser.
He wants an absolute deluge.
Yeah.
To maximize the flow, to empty the massive beast as quickly as possible. And suddenly, hot, thick, heavy animal blood begins cascading, pouring like a waterfall through the wooden slats. It is literally raining hot blood in the pitch black of your trench.
And the initiate. The initiate does not cower in the corner.
No, not at all.
The historical accounts we have, like the incredibly detailed description from the poet Prudentius, describe the initiate actively throwing their head back into the torrent. They twist and turn their body in the tight space to ensure the blood coats every single inch of their pristine white toga. They cup their hands. They rub the steaming hot gore directly into their open eyes, deep into their ears.
They open their mouth, gasping for it, and let the thick blood coat their tongue, swallowing it down.
They are desperately drinking the life force. I want you to imagine the sheer, overwhelming sensory overload of that singular moment. The deafening sound of a massive, dying bull collapsing under its own weight on the wood directly above your head. The intense, metallic, choking copper smell of the hot blood filling the tight, unventilated space. The heat of it on your skin.
It is a complete, systematic psychological breaking point.
When the blood finally stops dripping, when the animal is dead, they finally drag the heavy wooden grating away. The blinding sun hits your face, and you slowly climb the ladder out of that pit, and you are no longer human. You are a walking, dripping, horrific specter of coagulating gore.
You look like a monster, but internally you are pristine, you are flawless. The congregations surrounding the pit, the priests, the crowds, they drop to their knees in absolute awe of you. They weep at the sight of you.
Because you are in Aeternum Marinatus, reborn for eternity.
The visceral shock of the hot blood has literally washed away your mortal fragility. Cybele offered total salvation through extreme, visceral physical trauma.
But not everyone wanted to be violently traumatized to find God. I mean, if Cybele was the raw, bloody, terrifying frenzy of unyielding nature, people also craved order. They craved a more refined, intellectual, cosmic control over the terrifying chaos of their lives.
They needed something cooler, something less chaotic.
Right. Which brings us to a massive pivot in the ancient psyche. We leave the dirt and the screaming and the blood of Phrygia, and we look across the sea toward the refined, ancient, starry mysticism of Egypt.
The esoteric mysteries of Isis.
By the time Isis fully infiltrates the Roman Empire, she is no longer just an ancient Egyptian deity of the Nile.
No, she has been heavily, brilliantly Hellenized during the centuries of the Ptolemaic period. Sophisticated Greek philosophy, Platonic thought, has wrapped itself around ancient Egyptian mysticism. Isis evolved into the ultimate universal queen of heaven.
And her appeal was staggeringly broad.
A destitute sex worker, shivering in the damp port of Ostia, could pray to her for protection. And the wealthiest, most educated aristocratic matron living in a marble villa on the Palatine Hill could undergo her expensive esoteric rites. Because Isis offered something incredibly rare, something completely absent from Jupiter and Mars. She offered compassionate intervention.
She actually cared if you were suffering.
She deeply cared, and more importantly, she had the cosmic authority to override fate itself. The traditional civic gods, even Jupiter, were ultimately bound by the rigid threads of destiny. They couldn't change the ultimate outcome.
But Isis could.
Isis boldly claimed that she wove the threads. She could look down, see your misery, reach her hand directly into your daily life, miraculously alter your path, and then hold your hand as she guided you safely through the terrifying, demon-haunted landscape of the underworld after you died.
To understand how a Roman actually accessed that kind of esoteric power, how they unlocked that relationship, we have to dive into the Golden Ass, Apelles' absolute masterpiece from the 2nd century.
This is an incredible piece of literature.
It really is. It is the most detailed, intimate, inside look we have at how a mystery initiation actually functioned, hiding right in plain sight inside a bizarre, sexually explicit, seemingly ridiculous comedy.
The protagonist is a young, wealthy, overeducated man named Lucius. And his fatal flaw, his absolute undoing, is curiositas. Prurient, reckless, obsessive curiosity.
He's not looking for God.
No, he isn't seeking spiritual enlightenment at all. He's seeking a thrill. He is traveling through Thessaly, a rugged land in Greece that was notorious throughout the ancient world for dark magic and necromancy. And he desperately wants to see it firsthand. So he cynically seduces a beautiful slave girl named Fotis, solely to get access to her mistress's hidden magical potions.
And the language Apelles uses here is so deliberate, so careful. He explicitly links intense sexual lust directly with profound spiritual destruction.
Right.
Lucius sneaks into the witch's laboratory. He tries to use a magical ointment to turn himself into an owl. He wants to physically fly above the world, to be an untouchable, arrogant voyeur. But in his rush and his lustful haste, he uses the wrong jar.
He makes a huge mistake.
He strips completely naked. He eagerly rubs the thick grease into his skin, expecting feathers to sprout, and instead he grows coarse, stiff hair. His face painfully elongates. His spine contorts. He turns into a literal donkey.
It is a brilliant, devastating philosophical metaphor. Lucius allows his base, animalistic desires, his unchecked sexual lust, his arrogance, his lack of discipline, to entirely overpower his higher human reason. And so, the universe forces his physical form to degrade to match the degraded state of his soul.
He becomes a beast of burden.
The true horror of the novel is that he retains his fully conscious human mind, but he is completely trapped inside an asocial, mute, clumsy animal body. He cannot speak. He can only bray.
And for the bulk of the novel, he is relentlessly tortured. He is beaten with sticks, starved, forced to grind grain in agonizing circles, passed from one sadistic, miserable owner to another.
Apuleius is making a profound Stoic statement to the reader here. Unchecked physical desire, living only for the flesh, is a literal form of spiritual slavery. You are already an animal.
And the only way out of that slavery is divine grace. In Book 11, Lucius is at the absolute end of his rope. He's broken. He's standing on a desolate beach at midnight, staring up at the full moon, weeping, praying for either a quick death or absolute salvation.
And out of the dark water, Isis rises from the sea.
She is luminous. She is overwhelming. She reveals to him that all the other goddesses of the ancient world, Athena, Venus, Diana, Ceres, they are just local, fragmented shadows of her true universal name.
She tells him there is a religious procession happening the very next day, and her high priest will be carrying a simple garland of roses. Lucius, in his donkey form, has to approach the priest and eat the roses.
A hierophagic act, the physical consumption of the sacred in order to achieve internal purity.
Exactly. Lucius approaches the priest, he eats the roses, and instantly the coarse donkey skin falls away, and he stands up a human man again. Naked, but spiritually cleansed.
But he is forever changed. He dedicates his entire existence, his entire fortune, to Isis, and he enters the deep inner sanctum of the temple to undergo the true initiation.
Now, Apuleius veils the actual mechanical details of the ritual. He says he would be struck dead if he revealed the true secrets. But the poetic words he uses to describe the experience are absolutely haunting.
Lucius says, I approached the boundaries of death, and treading on the threshold of Proserpine, I was carried through all the elements and returned to the threshold of light. At midnight, I saw the sun shining with a brilliant light.
He is describing a catabasis,
A descent.
a deeply engineered, voluntary psychological descent into the underworld. The priests guide you through the dark. You walk through the simulated realms of the dead, confronting the absolute, paralyzing terror of your own non-existence, navigating the elemental forces of the universe, and then you are suddenly, shockingly brought back into the blinding, overwhelming light of the goddess.
It is a total systematic reprogramming of the human ego. You die in the temple, so you never have to fear death again.
It's beautiful, really.
It is. But here is where the shadows really start to creep into the narrative. These profound initiations, these ego deaths, they happened in absolute secret. They happened in the pitch dark, deep behind heavy locked temple doors, and they required massive, staggering amounts of money to undergo.
And whenever you mix extreme secrecy, emotionally vulnerable initiates, and vast, unregulated elite wealth, you are building a perfect ecosystem for predators.
The Roman state knew this instinctively. It was the root of their deepest, most venomous paranoia about foreign cults.
The old men in the Senate believed these mysteries intentionally bypassed the supreme authority of the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, who traditionally held the power of life and death over his family.
The cults gave women independent emotional lives. They gave them a status that had nothing to do with their husbands. And in 19 CE, under the brooding, suspicious reign of the Emperor Tiberius, that patriarchal paranoia was spectacularly, tragically validated.
This is a real-world, deeply disturbing true crime story from antiquity, the scandal of Paulina.
It takes place around the Iseum Campens, the most magnificent, sprawling, hyper-wealthy temple of Isis right in the heart of Rome. Paulina is an aristocratic woman of impeccable standing. She is fiercely, beautifully devoted to the goddess Isis, and she is universally renowned throughout Rome for her absolute chastity and her unbending virtue.
And a wealthy, entitled Roman equestrian named Decius Mundus sees her.
And
And he becomes intensely, dangerously obsessed.
an obsession born entirely of rejection. Paulina turns down every single advance. She turns down every extravagant gift. Mundus is so deeply arrogant, so used to buying whatever he wants, that he eventually offers her the absurd astronomical sum of 200,000 drachmae for just a single night in his bed.
An offer that would buy a small province.
She flatly refuses. Mundus spirals into a dramatic, pathetic depression, threatening to starve himself to death. But he has a freed woman in his employ, a woman named Ide, a fixer.
A woman who intimately knows how the shadows and the back alleys of Rome actually operate.
Jade sees the angle that Mundus is too blind to see. Paulina's armor is her incredible virtue, but her singular vulnerability is her absolute, unshakable faith.
Ide takes 50,000 drachmae in heavy coin, and she bypasses Paulina entirely. She goes straight to the senior priests of the great Isis temple, the men who control the mysteries. She bribes them to orchestrate one of the most elaborate, Psychologically devastating, blasphemous deceptions in ancient history.
The priests, corrupted by the gold, approach Paulina. They solemnly tell her that the great jackal-headed god of the underworld, Anubis, has watched her devotion from the heavens.
He is captivated by her unmatched piety, and he demands, as a divine mandate, that she share his sacred bed deep in the temple that very night.
And because she trusts the institution completely, because these priests are her spiritual guides, she doesn't suspect a thing. She's overjoyed. Her husband, who also believes the priests, is incredibly proud.
They genuinely think their family is being elevated by the divine.
So she goes to the temple. She partakes in a solemn, sacred ritual meal. The priests respectfully escort her deep into the sanctuary, into a secluded, pitch-black inner bedroom. They close the heavy doors. They lock her in the dark.
And Decius Mundus, who had bribed his way into the temple and smuggled himself into that pitch-black room hours earlier, steps out of the shadows, under the guise of the god, speaking in whispers, bathes in total disorienting darkness. He takes her.
And she submits completely, weeping with joy, fully believing with every fiber of her being that she is experiencing a profound, mystical, divine union.
Mundus slips out of the room before dawn breaks.
For 3 entire days, Paulina walks proudly through Roman high society, publicly boasting about her miraculous encounter with Anubis. She feels spiritually untouchable. She is glowing, and Decius Mundus watches this from the sidelines.
And he cannot stand it. He cannot stand that she is happy, and he cannot stand that he isn't getting the credit for conquering her. His ego demands the final blow.
He intercepts her in the crowded street, and he drops the hammer. He coldly, maliciously tells her exactly what he did. He tells her she didn't sleep with a god. He tells her he violated her body, he broke her sacred vows, he made a mockery of her goddess, and he saved himself 200,000 drachmae by simply borrowing a dog god's name in the dark.
The psychological devastation is absolute. It is total ruin. It is rape by deception, layered with the complete atomic shattering of her entire spiritual reality. She collapses. She violently tears her expensive clothes in the middle of the street.
Her outraged husband bypasses the magistrates and goes directly to the Emperor Tiberius.
When you look at this horrific event through the paranoid eyes of a traditional Roman man, doesn't this entirely justify their hatred of these secret cults?
Exactly. This is precisely what they feared. It's exactly like a modern charismatic cult leader isolating a vulnerable follower, severing them from their family's protection, and exploiting them in the dark.
It entirely validates their worst nightmare. And the Roman state response is characteristically swift and brutally disproportionate. Tiberius doesn't just punish the perpetrators, he decides to punish the entire religion.
The senior priests who took the bribe are dragged out and crucified. Ide, the fixer, is crucified.
The magnificent, incredibly expensive temple, the Lyceum Campense, is ordered by the emperor to be physically torn down to the bedrock, smashed to dust. And the ancient sacred statue of Isis is dragged through the filthy streets by ropes and thrown into the murky waters of the Tiber River.
It is a loud, violent message to the entire empire. Any religion that operates in the shadows, that relies on secrecy, and that subverts the control of the Roman family will be eradicated without mercy.
But wait, what about Decius Mundus, the man who actually orchestrated the rape?
Nearly banished. Exiled to a comfortable island.
Unbelievable.
He was an aristocratic Roman male acting on intense romantic passion. In the deeply twisted, patriarchal, legal logic of ancient Rome, the true, unforgivable crime against the state was the religious subversion and the corruption by the foreign priests, not the physical violation of the woman by the Roman citizen.
That really shows where their priorities were.
So if the ecstatic cult of Isis terrified the patriarchy by empowering women and operating in the soft, uncontrollable realm of emotion and fate, the empire clearly needed an antidote. The Roman military machine, the legions holding the borders against the barbarians, they needed a mystery cult that didn't subvert masculine control, but weaponized it.
They needed a religion of blood, of war, of iron discipline, and absolute unbreakable hierarchy. They needed Mithras.
Mithraism is arguably the most fascinating puzzle of late antiquity because it appears to be entirely deliberately synthetic.
Yes, it boldly claims to have ancient Persian, Zoroastrian roots, the eternal cosmic struggle between the light of Ahura Mazda and the darkness of Ahriman, but in reality it was perfectly ruthlessly engineered for the psychology of the Roman legions.
It was an exclusively, aggressively male brotherhood. No women allowed under any circumstances, no loud public festivals in the streets, no ecstatic dancing.
It was a subterranean religion, a religion of the dirt. You think about the grand traditional temples of Jupiter or Apollo. They're built on high hills, open to the blue sky, massive white columns gleaming in the sun, designed to project power outward.
But the cult of Mithras actively hid from the sun. They burrowed into the earth.
The Mithraea. That was their sacred space. They were small, intentionally windowless caves, often painstakingly carved directly into the solid bedrock, or hidden away in the deep, damp basements of public buildings and military forts.
When you walked down the stairs and stepped into a Mithraeum, you were entirely cut off from the empire above. You couldn't hear the chariots, you couldn't see the sun. It was intensely claustrophobic.
It forced a profound, inescapable intimacy. Usually, no more than 20 or 30 men could fit inside a single cave.
And at the far end of every single one of these dark caves, stretching from Hadrian's Wall in Scotland all the way to the deserts of Syria, lit only by the flickering, dancing light of small oil lamps, was the exact same mesmerizing image, the tauroctony.
A beautifully carved relief of Mithras, a strong, calm youth wearing a flowing cape and a Phrygian cap. He is forcefully pinning a massive, struggling bull to the ground. He pulls its heavy head back by the nostrils, and he plunges a short dagger deep into its neck.
But unlike the taurobolium of Cybele, this isn't a sacrifice to appease an angry god.
No, it is an act of violent cosmological engineering. As the bull dies under Mithras's blade, its spilling blood miraculously turns into heavy clusters of grapes and creeping vines. Its severed spinal cord transforms into stalks of golden wheat.
Mithras is violently, forcefully creating a living universe out of the raw chaos of the beast.
And the entire violent scene is actually a highly complex astrological map. Surrounding the dying bull, you have a dog leaping at the wound, a snake slithering beneath it, a scorpion pinching the bull's genitals, a raven watching from above.
These aren't just animals, they directly correspond to specific constellations positioned along the celestial equator.
The cult is esoteric. It is quietly communicating to the initiate that Mithras is a hypercosmic entity, the invincible sun. He doesn't just live in the stars, he physically, mechanically moves the universe.
And to follow him, to gain his invincible protection, you couldn't just pay a bribe. You had to climb a grueling ladder of intense, brutal psychological conditioning, the 7 grades of initiation.
Mirroring the 7 planetary spheres that the soul tragically descends through at birth, picking up impurities along the way. You start at the absolute bottom as a raven, a servant, fetching water for the elders.
Then you progress to the male bride, a deeply submissive role. Then the soldier, the lion, the Persian, the sunrunner, and finally the supreme, unquestioned leader of the cave, the father.
But you didn't just study complex astrological texts to advance to the next level. You endured the cruciatus, the trials of fortitude. And this is where the cult feels less like a religion and more like hyper-elite, dark ops, military hazing designed to break the human mind.
We have concrete archaeological evidence of this brutality. Look at the stunning 3rd century frescoes discovered in a well-preserved Mithraeum in Santa Maria Capua Vetere in Italy. The images are degrading, but what you can decipher from the fading paint is absolutely terrifying.
You see a young initiate, completely stripped naked, stripped of all his heavy armor, stripped of his military rank, stripped of all his Roman civic dignity. He is tightly blindfolded. His hands are bound fiercely behind his back with coarse rope. He is forced to his knees in the cold dirt of the cave.
He is utterly, helplessly vulnerable in a room full of armed men.
And standing directly over him in the flickering lamplight is the high priest, the father, who is physically pushing a drawn, sharp sword, or in some varying scenes, a burning, crackling torch directly into the blindfolded man's face, pushing it right up against the skin.
In another fresco on the same wall, the initiate is stretched out flat on the floor, seemingly dead, while the others watch. It is a highly ritualized, incredibly tense mock execution. The father is symbolically, violently murdering the initiate's weak, mortal old self.
Think about the mechanics of it. By intentionally pushing you to the absolute brink of panic, by manipulating your nervous system into genuinely believing you are about to be summarily executed in the dark by your own brothers, and then miraculously pulling you back from the edge, they systematically sever your biological fear of death.
That is the core of it. You endure extreme, freezing cold, forced starvation, complete sensory deprivation, and mock murder. By surviving it, by not breaking, your physical body becomes hardened, passionless. You no longer fear the black void of the battlefield because you have already died quietly in the cave.
But here is my question. This is the friction point. You have a Roman legionary. His entire existence, his entire paycheck, his entire honor is predicated on absolute, unquestioning obedience to his commanding general and to the emperor in Rome.
How does he pledge his eternal soul to an alien, invincible, cosmic god in a dark cave without committing fundamental psychological treason against the Roman Empire?
By entirely redefining what true allegiance actually is. And you see this genius psychological maneuver perfectly in this specific initiation right into the third grade, the Miles, the soldier.
We know about this because the early Christian apologist Tertullian, who despised the cult, describes it in horrified detail.
The naked initiate kneels in the cave, and a physical crown or a woven laurel wreath is offered to him. But it is often balanced precariously on the bleeding point of a drawn sword.
A symbol of civic glory, the laurel wreath. The exact, literal thing a Roman soldier spends his entire violent life bleeding in the mud to achieve.
And the initiate, trembling in the dark, has to reach up and physically, aggressively thrust the crown away. He has to violently reject it, and he declares out loud, echoing off the stone walls, "Mithras is my crown."
Chills. Just absolute chills. To reject Rome for the cosmos.
It is a radical, profoundly subversive act of spiritual defiance. Following that loud declaration, the initiate's forehead is permanently branded with a hot iron, or deeply tattooed, with the crot, the ancient symbol of the sun.
From that day forward, until the day he dies in battle or of old age, that soldier is strictly forbidden from ever wearing a crown at a military triumph, a banquet, or a civic festival. If they try to place one on his head, he must throw it to the ground.
He has permanently marked himself as a sworn member of a sacred hidden militia. He is quietly telling the loud world above, "I will serve the emperor in the flesh, I will hold the line against the barbarians, but my soul belongs to a power that moves the stars."
It is the ultimate psychological armor. You cannot break a man who has already surrendered his fear. But all of this, the visceral, steaming blood baptisms of Cybele, the deeply esoteric psychological descents of Isis, the hardened, underground, blood-bound brotherhoods of Mithras, all of these intense, incredibly beautiful, deeply terrifying systems are about to hit an absolute brick wall.
A radical, obscure sect originating from a dusty, rebellious province in Judea steps into the crowded religious marketplace, and within 3 centuries, it utterly, completely monopolizes the human soul.
Christianity. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the spiritual marketplace of the Roman Empire is a bloodbath. Christianity and the mystery cults are aggressively hunting for the exact same demographic. They are looking for the exact same isolated citizens who are desperate for personal salvation, desperate for a tight-knit community, and desperate for a guaranteed victory over death.
And if you were just a neutral Roman observer, a pagan merchant walking down the street, Christianity just looked like another bizarre mystery cult. Think about it from the outside.
They refuse to participate in civic sacrifices. They meet in secret, in closed spaces, cramped house churches. You have to go through a rigorous, lengthy period of esoteric instruction before you are even allowed to witness the core sacred rites.
They literally dunk you underwater in a dark room to wash away your past life and initiate you into a new pure one.
And they aggressively worship a savior god who is violently, publicly executed by the state and then miraculously resurrected. But the most jarring similarity, the one that absolutely terrified both sides of this religious war, was the communal meal.
The central core of Christian worship was gathering in secret to consume bread and wine, which they explicitly, unapologetically referred to as consuming the literal flesh and blood of their god.
It sounds exactly uncomfortably like the intimate banquets of Mithras or the visceral, bloody sacrifices of Magna Mater, and the early Christian apologists absolutely freaked out about this. They were terrified.
Justin Martyr, one of the most prominent early Christian writers, looks at the Mithraic rituals. He looks at the tauroctony where men are bathed in blood to be reborn, and he fundamentally panics.
He engages in these deep, desperate philosophical gymnastics to explain it away. He actually writes down, in absolute seriousness, that ancient demons must have read the Old Testament prophecies, mathematically calculated what Jesus was going to do centuries later, and then preemptively created diabolical imitations among the pagans just to confuse the masses.
It's a massive theological damage control, because the similarities are too close for comfort. Now, fast forward to the 19th century, you had secular rationalist historians swinging the pendulum entirely the other way. They aggressively claimed that Christianity was entirely unoriginal, that it just lazily copy-pasted the dying and rising god motif directly from Osiris, Attis, and Mithras.
But both of those theories, Justin Martyr's demons and the 19th century plagiarism argument, entirely miss the complex reality on the ground.
They weren't stealing from each other. They were just breathing the exact same culturally saturated air.
The entire Mediterranean world shared a deeply ingrained religious vocabulary. If you wanted to express the concept of profound spiritual purification in late antiquity, you used the physical elements of blood or water. If you wanted to express intimate communion with the divine, you shared a sacred restricted meal.
The epic struggle of light versus darkness, the necessity of descending into the dark earth to find ultimate truth, these were simply the psychological tools available to everyone. Christianity didn't cynically plagiarize the mysteries, it naturally spoke the exact same cultural language because it was desperately trying to answer the exact same human trauma.
So that brings us to the multi-million-dollar historical question, the ultimate puzzle. If the underlying product is fundamentally similar, if Isis gives you a mother's warm comfort, and Mithras gives you an unbreakable brotherhood, and Christianity gives you a supportive church, why did Christianity win? Why did the mysteries completely die out?
To understand that, we should look at the Emperor Julian the Apostate. He was the last pagan emperor ruling in the 4th century. A brilliant man who desperately, tragically tried to revive the old gods and push back the Christian tide. He analyzed the Christian success with absolute bitter frustration, and he identified their strategic supremacy. He realized they were simply outcompeting the pagans, and it came down to 3 vital structural advantages.
First, text over myth, the portable library.
The mystery cults relied almost entirely on fluid oral tradition and intensely visceral, in-person, unrepeatable experiences. If a Roman legion, acting on Christian orders, marches into a town, destroys the local Mithraeum, and physically kills the father of the cave, the cult in that city is permanently erased.
The esoteric knowledge dies in his head. The lineage is broken.
But Christianity was fundamentally grounded in a highly organized, standardized, fiercely protected textual library. The Old and New Testaments. If you execute a Christian bishop, if you burn down his church, it doesn't matter. The scriptures survive. They can be perfectly copied, smuggled in saddlebags, read aloud in the dark, and spread across thousands of miles. The ideology is highly portable and it is bulletproof.
Second advantage, the unconditional safety net. The Roman world in the 3rd century was collapsing. It was an apocalyptic nightmare. Hyperinflation, endless civil wars, and massive devastating plagues like the plague of Cyprian that were literally wiping out entire cities, leaving corpses rotting in the streets.
If you were a devoted member of the cult of Isis, and you got sick with the plague, Isis offered beautiful spiritual comfort for the afterlife. But the cult didn't run a hospital. Mithraism was a hardened boys' club for healthy fighting soldiers. They didn't care for the weak.
But the Christian church had built a massive, highly organized, empire-wide welfare state. They systematically, fearlessly cared for widows, orphans, the sick, and the starving destitute, regardless of whether those people were initiated into the faith.
In a terrifying world where the magistrates had fled the cities, where the state had completely abandoned you to die coughing in the gutter, the Christians stayed behind. They brought you physical food. They washed your feverish, contagious body. The sociological gravity of that kind of relentless, fearless charity in an age of terror is insurmountable. It pulls everyone into its orbit.
And the third reason, which I think is most brutal and the most effective, absolute exclusivity, the spiritual black hole.
Think about the pagan mindset. It's an additive, open-source platform. You can wake up in the morning, sacrifice a dove to Jupiter for the health of the emperor, go down to the market and pray at the temple of Magna Mater at lunch, and then drink heavily spiced wine in a dark Mithraic cave at midnight. None of those gods are jealous of the others. It's a crowded pantheon.
But Christianity inherited the fierce, unyielding, absolute monotheism of Judaism. It demanded total, uncompromising abandonment of the past. It didn't just politely say, our God is better, add him to your shelf. It explicitly said, our God is the only God, and every single deity you, your father, and your grandfather have ever worshipped is literally a demonic entity actively trying to drag your soul into eternal hellfire.
It's a closed ecosystem tech monopoly. You cannot run competing apps. You have to delete all other software to run it. And once vulnerable people cross that threshold, once they deeply absorb that terrifying fear of demonic contamination, they never ever went back.
The pagan demographic base was constantly fracturing, constantly shifting allegiances, but the church just kept relentlessly absorbing and holding. They locked the doors behind you.
And then the board flips completely.
Yeah.
Early 4th century, the Emperor Constantine miraculously converts. Suddenly, overnight, the immense wealth, the vast legal infrastructure, and the crushing military weight of the Roman Empire align perfectly with the organizational genius of the church. The game is over.
And it does not end peacefully. We have this Highly sanitized, romanticized idea of ancient Rome just quietly fading into a serene Christian era. It wasn't quiet, it was gritty, and it was violently enforced. By the late 4th century, the Emperor Theodosius points the terrifying machinery of the state directly at the pagans.
The brutal decrees come down from the palace. Blood sacrifices of any kind are strictly outlawed under penalty of death. The ancient sacred fires that burned for centuries in the temples are forcefully snuffed out. And it wasn't just sterile legal decrees, it was terrifying mob violence. Militant, black-robed monks marching aggressively through the streets of ancient cities, systematically, physically dismantling the architectural landscape of the ancient mind.
They besieged the great Serapeum in Alexandria, one of the wonders of the world. They dragged the ancient statues out into the harsh sunlight and smashed the marble faces with iron axes. They actively hunt down the hidden subterranean Mithria. They crack the stone roofs open to let the glaring daylight in. They desecrate the altars with garbage, and they intentionally, symbolically, build massive Christian basilicas directly on top of them, pinning the old gods down in the dirt forever.
And the tauroctony pits those deep, dark trenches where terrified men bathed in hot, thick blood to find a fleeting glimpse of eternity. They're unceremoniously filled in with rubble and dirt. The galley priests, the men of the third gender, are hunted down. Their bright, beautiful silks are stripped away, and they're either forced into miserable exile or forced at sword point to the baptismal font. The ancient world is silenced.
As we step back from the rubble, the magnificent temples are gone, the blood is washed away from the streets, the drums of Cybele are silent. What is the legacy of all this trauma? Did all of this profound, intense human searching just evaporate into nothing?
No. They didn't vanish. The cults were outcompeted, they were politically destroyed, but their deep psychological DNA was completely absorbed into the victor. When you have a massive institution absorbing millions of terrified pagans over a few generations, you inevitably, unavoidably absorb their visual and emotional vocabulary.
The intense, visceral human need for a compassionate, maternal protector, the exact space held so beautifully by Isis and Cybele, finds a seamless, powerful new home in the veneration of the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary.
The cosmic timing, too. The birth of Christ seamlessly, brilliantly overlaying the December 25th festival of Sol Invictus, the invincible sun, the sun returning from the darkness.
You walk into a sprawling Catholic or Orthodox basilica today, anywhere in the world, and what do you actually experience? You experience the heavy, sweet burning of incense filling the air. You hear the hypnotic, rhythmic chanting echoing in the semi-darkness. You see the prominent visual motif of the brilliant golden halos surrounding the head of a saint.
These are not coincidences. These are the lingering, undeniable echoes of late antiquity. The mystery cults were the agonized, bloody, necessary bridge between the cold, mathematical transactions of the ancient city-state and the deeply personal, intimate, emotional monotheism that built the entire modern Western world.
They taught a species that was utterly terrified of the dark, that religion wasn't just a boring civic duty you performed to appease a magistrate. It was a desperate, beautiful, and sometimes utterly horrific struggle for the survival of the human soul. It was the profound realization that you could actually physically touch the divine if you were just willing to bleed for it.
They forced the individual to stop hiding in the crowd, to confront their own mortality face to face, to step into the claustrophobic cave, to descend into the bloody pit, and to demand an answer from a silent universe.
Which brings us to the present, right here, right now. You listen to this heavy history, you see the hot blood, the dark underground caves, the desperate, beautiful grasp for personal meaning. And then you look out at our modern world. We are living in a new kind of cold, highly efficient, digital civic religion. We perform our repetitive daily rituals on glowing screens, we blindly sign our endless terms of service agreements, and we are experiencing an era of intense, suffocating, unprecedented isolation. So I leave you with this: where are the new mysteries? In a sanitized world that has systematically erased the physical danger and the spiritual ecstasy of life, where are people secretly descending into the dark right now to find the visceral, undeniable proof that they actually matter? Think about that.